Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Cisco on technology trends and business continuity. It's great to have so many participants here today. My name is Ulrike Bahr-Gedalia, and I am the Senior Director, Digital Economy, Technology and Innovation with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. A few housekeeping items before we dive into the webinar. Your mics will be muted so we have the best possible audio for the presenters, and also due to the great number of participants today, which is wonderful. Secondly, there is a Q&A function in WebEx. It's to your right. We encourage you to use it during the session to populate the questions. And at the end of today's presentation, the panelists will attend to those questions and answer them. Thirdly, we will be holding a series of polls throughout today's call where we welcome your participation. And lastly, at the end of the session, Cisco will also be sharing details around free access to mental health resources, free trials available to you right now, and the opportunity to win $3,000 worth of work from home, security, and networking technology specifically tailored for SMEs. That's fabulous. Before I go any further, I want to take a moment and thank Cisco for being a much valued CBRN partner. In addition to all the wonderful partners we have here displayed on the slide, everyone's commitment and dedication and support is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much to all of our partners and Cisco. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Cisco before we go to the presenters and presentation itself. With 85% of the world's internet traffic traveling over Cisco infrastructure, Cisco is uniquely positioned as one of the few companies with the technology, people, partners, and global scale to help SMEs stay connected and secure for business continuity. Recognized as the world's #1 best workplace by Great Places to Work and the top international corporate citizen by Corporate Knights, Cisco is committed to helping its communities maintain business operations and resiliency as we all transition to the next normal. So today I have the honor to be joined by two Cisco executives, Lisa Richardson and Wayne Cuervo, and they will dive into 3 topics which we will cover. One of them is business resiliency solutions across several verticals, the importance of cybersecurity for all Canadian businesses, and the importance of continued focus on mental health as an imperative within the COVID business continuity framework and resources available for Canadian business owners. Lisa Richardson, I would like to introduce her now. She is the Vice President of Solution Sales and responsible for driving growth across Cisco's product portfolio in Canada. For the past 16 years at Cisco, Lisa has held various sales roles in sales, including global account management, and as leader of Cisco Canada's enterprise networking business. Wayne, he is the Director of Innovation at Cisco Canada, responsible for leading the Cisco Toronto Innovation Center to deliver programming that accelerates innovation across Cisco's key vertical industries. The first of its kind in North America. That's really impressive, by the way. The Cisco Toronto Innovation Center helps organizations improve business outcomes by integrating, creating, testing, and validating tech solutions. Without further ado, the floor or the screen is yours, Lisa and Wayne, please.
Thanks, Ulrike. So we'll get started. Just to give a quick overview of an agenda, we're going to cover a lot of topics around business continuity and resilience. We're going to touch on some trends with specific industry focus. We'll start off with retail financial services, then go to education, where Lisa will take over, cover security, and then small business resources, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. But to get started, what we like to talk about within the context of COVID are kind of some of the phases that we have witnessed throughout this phase. And the first off was, when this pandemic hit in March and everything went into immediate lockdown, there was an immediate requirement to respond to that. It was around how do we operate businesses, and when businesses need to be shut, how do we have things like social distancing? How do we have electronic engaging, allowing our employees to work remotely, and still maintaining an operation even in the face of that shutdown? Well, we're well past that phase now, but where we have been for the past couple of months is in the reflection phase. And that is really around how do businesses plan for the next 3 months to 12 months out. And that's really around looking at how do we build out new hybrid work models? How do we understand what a business needs to do to retain institutional knowledge as they are having a very disparate workforce? How to do things like stabilize the supply chain in the face of all of the issues that we've seen. And that was really to understand how does a business stay successful, and then how do they move now where we are is the reimagine phase. And that's really around planning for a new normal or many versions of new normals. And that's around understanding and embracing the learnings of Horizons 1 and 2. How do we, encourage businesses to do what we've been talking about in innovation for a long time: fail fast, learn, and move on. And this is really an important part of the conversation, because digital transformation has been and will be the underpinning of any future viability of a company. And those companies that have invested in digital transformation are those that are more able and more agile to develop and light up new routes to market, new access to customer opportunities, increase customer experiences in the face of all of this, these very difficult times. And we know these are difficult times, and there will be a conversation around business will be difficult, and there will be struggles for profitability. So this is the best time to double down on digital transformation, because it's going to be a struggle for profitability anyway. So this is the time to learn and really test out your skills for the final phase of this, which will be the rebound phase. And how do we take all of the learnings and these new business models and newfound agility and accelerate those strategies and put them into place? So this is really around doubling down on all of these newfound agilities and capabilities. As we're looking in this current phase, there's going to be a conversation around the return to the workplace. So we're going to actually tee up a poll for you guys right now. What percentage of a workforce do you think will return to the workplace in the next 6 months? And I'll ask you while you're doing that to take a minute or two to answer that question while I go to the next slide, which is around how do we look at work. The work being the new normal for work is no longer a place, it's an activity. As we moved into this new world, there is a new understanding that businesses are having these remote workforces. They are needing to address their customer requirements, and those customers can be large or small customers. And they need to understand how do they allow their customers to have greater access or equal access to their solutions, regardless of where they're working. And as this trend moves into whatever the next phases are, we know that there may be lingering outcomes of this, and these work from home models may continue because of increased things like increased productivity and increased or decreased real estate costs. So maybe let's check in with the results of the poll and see what you guys said on the line.
Wayne, it looks like most people felt that sort of 20 to 50% of the organization would return to the workforce or the traditional workplace, if you will. And then others, the next largest group had said sort of 50 to 90% in the next 6 months. So that's kind of where it's consistent with what we're seeing in a lot of the organizations that we're speaking to. And I think your point around a long-term transition to a more remote or hybrid work environment is front and center on a lot of organizations' minds, not just in the next 6 months, but beyond.
Exactly. And this kind of brings us to the workplace trends that we're looking at. So, within the first 2 months of this, a quarter of CFOs were planning to reduce physical space for their offices. 75% of other CFOs looked at the permanent remote access for those employees, to remove them from the office and have them work from home permanently. 40 to 60% of this survey suggested that employees want to have a few days of the week where they work from home, regardless of future vaccine availability. And there's an HR poll that actually came out and said, for an employee to come into the office is about 20% of that employee's salary. Even if employees continue to work from home, even if they lose 5% productivity, that's still a return on investments, for a decent return on investment for a lot of employers. So these are things that we're thinking of. And there was a couple of things that came out of the news recently where, Fujitsu said they're going to move 50% of their workforce to work at home. But we also know that this could be somewhat cyclical, because it wasn't that long ago where we saw folks like IBM and Yahoo say that all employees need to be in the office. So is this going to be an over-rotation, or is this going to be the true new normal? And I think we'll have to wait and see. But I think there's a lot of trends that would, or a lot of things that would result in or indicate the trend that we're going towards. So another poll question. Do you feel your organization has been more or less productive during this time? So I'll let you guys answer that. As we look at returning to the workplace, there's a couple considerations that we are working actively with our customers to resolve. The new footprint of a workplace is going to be very different. How do we understand what a new full office looks like? Because of social distancing requirements, that may look very different. Can we do technology capabilities that will notify employees when their office is at capacity not to go in? Or how do we help them understand what the new requirements for maximum meeting room attendance looks like? And how do we let them know when they have exceeded that limit? Or how do we help them do things like contact tracing? We've heard, provincial and federal governments talk about contact tracing apps. Is there a way that we can help employers with contact tracing, that they can let employees know that they may have come into contact with someone with COVID while still maintaining privacy and identity, which would be very important? And there's a lot of technologies that we can look at for smart cleaning solutions. How do you notify cleaning staff when an area needs cleaning, elevator capacity, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of technologies that we're working with our customers to help them move safely back into the workforce, whatever that looks like. Do we have results on those poll numbers?
We're still leaving it open, Wayne, so we'll give it another minute.
Another minute to move on. Okay, perfect. So let's go to retail, and let's talk about some trends within retail. So because of COVID, the average consumer has said that they spend about $250 directly as a result of COVID for specific items. 36% of respondents said that when they go into a store, they are using self-checkout. 52% of people say that they are more likely to spend more online, and they will change their purchase patterns by cutting footwear and apparel by 44%. 72% of respondents would like retailers to limit purchase quantities. And from a grocery perspective, 45% of respondents say that they will have enough food in their house to last 1 to 2 weeks, and are likely to spend, 21% are likely to spend more on groceries and less on discretionary spending, like restaurants and bars. So the major theme of all of this is that consumer buying patterns are changing. And when we look at companies that have taken years to understand their customer, know their customer, and built up models to understand customer buying patterns, customer behavior, how to maximize things like loyalty programs, with these new models and trends that are emerging, a lot of that data may go out the window, and customer and retailers may be facing a cold start position when they try to understand their new models of their consumers. And as we, again, go back to those 4 R's in the beginning, are they looking at these new hybrid business models that they're developing and thinking about the analytics, the awareness of their customers, and how they're building out these capabilities that may be permanent? When we can think of a simple example like curbside pickup. I don't know how many of you are using curbside pickup for groceries or even LCBO purchases. Is that a new route to a channel to customer that will be continuing well beyond COVID? And as they're building these capabilities out, are they thinking about the long-term retail analytics that they need to derive across all brand touch points and all channels to customers? So I think that's something that we all need to think about as we move forward. So I think we have the result, another poll question for you. Has your organization, how is your ability within your organization to monitor customer experience post-COVID? Has it improved during these post-COVID times? So we'll give you a minute to answer that one. So let's move on to some initiatives that we're looking at. Again, we have a lot of retail customers, and some of the things that we're working with them on are things like helping simplify curbside pickup and line and queue management with a vehicle pickups with things like license plate recognition using camera technology. How do we do things like help them with remote and intelligent contact center, which has been a key solution that customers have been able to deploy within this period of COVID, especially relevant in the context of sometimes when you need to call a store, that store may not be open. So the contact center may be somewhere else. And how can we deliver a scalable, robust, cloud-based contact center that can scale to high or low demand, all dynamically based on the requirements of our customers? And can we build AI on top of that? We can do things like social distance monitoring and social density monitoring. So can we help a retailer understand what aisles are heavily traversed and have too much density? Or can we provide awareness when customers are within their location and not adhering to social distancing requirements and have alerts or mechanisms of notifying them? Another trend that we have seen and we've been working actively with customers on around ghost kitchens and pop-up sites. A lot of this has been facilitated by restaurants that don't have storefronts that they can serve, but they're making pop-up ghost kitchens to facilitate food delivery services. So that's a really interesting model that has emerged. So there's a lot of technologies that we've been working with our customers to really amplify their ability to still get in front of their customers, have new hybrid channels to reach their customers, and to do things like awareness of safety and security around PPE, compliance, and even work from home capabilities, which obviously security is a major part of. So let's pause there.
Yeah, Wayne, it's a fairly even split from the group on the call around, being able to measure sort of customer success or loyalty throughout in a post-COVID environment. So it's a pretty even split there, which would indicate it's not inconsistent with what we're seeing in terms of a lot of organizations having to pivot and shift quite quickly to perhaps more online or more mobile transaction. And how do you ensure that you become and stay very close and very relevant to your customer, right? And then just wanted to touch back on the productivity, because we did talk about that at the beginning. It was more than almost 50% of the respondents felt that they were more productive in this environment. So I think that's very telling as organizations evaluate their real estate footprint, and evaluate kind of that new normal going forward, right? I think there's, yes, it's yet to be seen and, what inning we're in this long game, but I think we're all in agreement this is a long game, this pandemic. and where individuals will call work or the office moving forward. Because I think there are a lot of individuals feeling that we hear from customers that they are more productive. I think the downside is, people would really enjoy a change of scenery every once in a while, right? So, there are pros and cons to every side of this, but generally it's consistent with what we're seeing in terms of people feeling just a bit more productive.
I absolutely agree. I think we can all acknowledge that at the very minimum, the commute times that we have faced in the past is now, that's given back to productivity, and that's a much sometimes better use of time than sitting in traffic. So, so thanks for that, Lisa. That is really interesting. Let's move on to financial services, because I think financial services is again a super interesting industry in especially in the face of COVID. And the financial services industry, as we moved into 2020, was facing a couple major themes of focus. And primarily the first one was that around unifying strategy, technology, and operations. And that includes things like, how do they do data management? How do they modernize core infrastructure? And how do they prepare for all these new technologies that are coming down the pipeline? And that investing in digital innovation and transformation it is a core component of what banks need to focus on and financial institutions need to focus on. And that is, when we look at things like migration to the cloud, when we look at how do they embrace AI, blockchain, quantum computing in the future, there's a lot of opportunities that can embed and deliver a much stronger customer experience across all of this. Another piece of it is, prioritizing that value for customers. And I think there's a conversation here around providing an opportunity for that value for many that scales across everything that banks can deliver. And also from an employee perspective, how do they provide value for employees and do meaningful work for employees? And I think that there's a whole conversation, the redesign and acceleration of learning that can happen within banks. And then as we move to privacy, that's been obviously a big conversation over the past little while, and banks are taking a much more proactive approach around privacy. And we as consumers are also looking at being much more demanding and critical of how our own privacy and data is being used. And when banks approach this from a more holistic perspective around not just complying with, compliance policies and regulation, but taking into account that consumers want more awareness and transparency of how their data is being used, is a major shift for financial institutions. And then there's a whole conversation around risk. So these are the 5 areas that banks were really, and financial institutions generally, were working on as we move into COVID. And how does this all now be reflected in this new landscape? And we'll talk about a couple trends here. One of the things that another Gallup survey said that in 2030 there will be 75% of the workforce which will be millennials. Well, when we think about what does that mean from a work style perspective, and all of these remote technologies, I think will become very ingrained in our daily activities as we engage with financial services. Again, this is an American survey, but 60% still prefer a branch for an account opening. So they still want to go into a branch and speak to somebody for an account when they're opening an account. But they don't expect that people will need to visit branches as much in the future. So right now, or in 2018, there was on average of 7 branch visits per customer. They're expecting in 2020 to go down to 4. So they still want to have a branch, but they want to use it for fewer and fewer things, which I think speaks to a lot of the virtual capabilities and the remote access that we're talking about now, because it's becoming so pervasive for all of us to do things like even this session virtually, that a remote expert opportunity to meet with a financial advisor can happen virtually and doesn't require a face-to-face person meeting all the time. Um, Highly satisfied customers are 2 to 3 times more likely to increase deposits. And that speaks to, again, customer experience and how customers are now demanding more from banks. Customers are aware that banks have a lot of their data and know their buying patterns, know their spending and saving patterns, and they're looking for more personalized recommendations based on that data that they have. And the financial institutions believe that a buyer-centric model is the most effective way to gain consumer trust. So I think not that this is all specific relevant to COVID. I think COVID amplifies a lot of these issues and opportunities from a banking perspective or a financial services perspective. So let's talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we're covering with some of our financial institutions. Obviously, secure remote work is a big part of that. As all of these employees and financial institutions have been sent home, they needed collaboration technology and they needed to work in a secure environment that scaled out the infrastructure within that corporate environment. Things like remote expertise is a critical thing now. So you can meet with your financial advisor or your mortgage broker all virtually, again, over secure connectivity. Intelligent contact center, we've talked about it in retail. It is even more important in financial services, as you can have that, again, scalable cloud-based solution that is specifically amplified with artificial intelligence to give consumers a better the system has a better understanding of consumer behavior and routing questions and consumer issues and amplifying the experience. And then obviously all the other stuff like safety within those business environments. How do we help with omni-channel first? So ensuring that the data and the experience of a customer is across all brand touch points and go-to-market channels. And then obviously physical and digital channel integrations is a core one. So I'm going to move on with this. And I think, Lisa, I'll turn this over to you to continue with education.
Thank you, Wayne. So if you want to think about, I think a lot of us are struggling with, having children at home and underfoot, and I'm sure a lot of your employees are as well. And maybe we'll flip to the next slide, Wayne, and kick off with the, oh, I thought we had to pull. We'll go back. I apologize. So in that vein, I think we can all agree that, our education system, at least in Canada, has been, pretty ripe for disruption. We've had tons of wonderful advances in curriculum and that type of thing in the kindergarten to grade 12 space over the years. But the transition to teaching and delivering learning remotely hasn't existed until quite recently. And then, if we think about our colleges and our universities in this country, we have such amazing research and richness and innovation and development happening across so many of these universities, many of whom are even working towards a vaccine, right, or studies around that in light of the pandemic. However, the majority of the delivery of the lectures and training and practical training in the sense of colleges has been largely in person, in class, very hands-on. So Wayne, if you want to go forward to the next slide. So I think, we're all aware, and, for a lot of the higher education is the universities and colleges is trying to maintain that student population when they may have to shift temporarily to delivering only remotely in the next 6 to 12 months, and certainly as they did in the last 4 months. That can have an impact on tuition, that can have an impact on attendance, it can have an impact on registration, the ability to attract and retain international students who, for reasons beyond their control, cannot get into the country at the moment. So there's a lot of financial pressure brewing in higher education. And then, security and privacy. This is certainly a community, whether we're talking about very young children or, children in high school through universities and colleges, that, security is paramount, right? And the learning curve is certainly limited in terms of, accessing the right content online versus, you know, going down a rabbit hole and ending up, you know, somewhere not so secure. You know, and I think a lot of the institutions are really struggling with this concept of bring your own device still. I mean, this idea of bring your own device has been out there for years and years and years, and now it's becoming much more pervasive in that the students aren't just using their devices, you know, in the cases of universities and colleges to do their papers or, you know, join, you know, instant message with friends, that kind of thing. They're using them to access assets, right, within the university. And so how do the universities and colleges protect those devices that they don't necessarily own? And we've seen a tremendous amount of focus on, you know, cloud security or remote security to help these organizations manage the influx of devices that they just do not own, right? And this is, of course, a huge pivot for teachers and administrators, and everybody supporting the education system, right? It's a new methodology. No longer are we standing at the front of a classroom with a whiteboard or a blackboard in some cases, or in front of a lecture hall of several thousand students. It's a new way of teaching. I mean, it's a new way for us of doing, you know, virtual events and that type of thing using technology like WebEx. And of course, you know, student health and well-being. I think everybody, or many of you, may have seen, you know, the recommendations that came out from Sick Kids last week as sort of general guidelines around, you know, encouraging getting children back into the classroom for the sake of their mental health and well-being. I think it's a really big concern right now for our youth being out of the classroom, and really figuring out what learning in this new environment is going to look like. These are sort of a broad swath of the challenges really facing our education system today, especially in Canada. And I think, you know, everyone's at a different stage, as Wayne mapped out, in terms of, you know, putting something very quickly into place to be able to accommodate a shutdown as we had to in March, and then taking the opportunity now to say, do we make the right decision? Do we make the right investment? Did we invest in the right technology? Are we enabling everyone correctly? Everyone's sort of in that stage now to kind of reimagine how we go forward, right? Assuming this is more of a long game. So here's the poll I was alluding to. Curious, you know, how many of you or your employees are doing double duty and doing remote learning from home? And, you know, if I tie that back to the productivity, where more than half of you felt you were more productive, you know, I think a lot of people would say that, you know, they're torn between sharing the household responsibilities and the teaching and doing the job, their day-to-day job from home right now. So I'd be interested, Wayne, when we have the results on this one. So in terms of our education system, you know, what is really needed, and Wayne alluded to, you know, what we're seeing in financial services as well, but there really is a demand for simple and secure collaboration tools. So the ability to have a tool, you know, like the WebEx platform we're using today, to easily join, chat, break out into smaller teams or learning groups or pods, if you will, and do all of that in a secure fashion so that they can consume the content that's being delivered by the teacher or the professor, and consume it, and then have a way to work collaboratively with their peers, and, you know, wrapping security around the entire experience. Next slide, please, Wayne. And so what we're seeing, like, with the organizations investing and investigating in these types of technologies, is really thinking long around sort of the continuity of this, and how long will this situation last, or will this become part of the general curriculum? And, you know, if I've got to justify my tuition, if I'm a university or a college, how do I shift to a more virtual model and still give value back to the students? And I think an interesting example is in the more practical studies, right, where there's a lot of hands-on. You're teaching somebody to be a chef, you're teaching somebody to you know, operate heavy machinery, those types of things that have been extremely hands-on. Obviously you still need that experience, but to be able to do some of that virtually and be able to pivot to that is going to allow those colleges to continue to run and be open. I think the other concept, and I'll give you an example of this around virtual experts, is thinking just beyond the classroom. So, you know, this remote world now is allowing us to gain access to experts and subject matter experts and other people outside of, you know, our own postal code, if you will, right? So the ability to draw those into the classroom. And Cisco has been in partnership for many years around an initiative called Connected North. And this is an amazing initiative that we are very, very proud of at Cisco, to deliver remote learning to rural and remote Indigenous communities within Canada. And this is a combination of, you know, our technology, but amazing content and experts that come in and help deliver this content. And we've got now over 75 schools in the network today, serving 20,000 students and families, with a tremendous amount of content providers. As I said, there's tons of content out there, and we've seen, you know, museums and art galleries and all kinds of, you know, places you would go for content and culture open up their content virtually. And so we're able to take that and extend it out to communities. And so the concept of something like Connected North and taking technology and the ability to extend it to remote geographies in our country, and just taking that on a more broader base, it exists. And it's very powerful when we can deliver it that way, and it absolutely has an impact for the children. And this example, I think, applies for both, you know, kindergarten to grade 12, as well as in the higher education or university and college space. It just really opens things up on getting more learning, getting more information into the hands of our youth today. So I would be remiss not to talk about security. You know, to say that hackers and bad actors have been opportunistic in light of the pandemic, it would be an understatement. I think, you know, in the face of uncertainty, they absolutely, you know, will come out and prey on individuals and organizations, etc. And it's very unfortunate. However, you know, there are certainly tools and technologies available that can be consumed, you know, via software, can be consumed in a fashion that allows you not to make a heavy investment and only consume what you need to secure your organization. And, you know, we're seeing, you know, this applies to companies of every size, right? So from, you know, small organizations with very few employees to massive, you know, banks and institutions, are thinking about, you know, if everybody's working remotely, how do I identify and know that you are who you say you are? And so tools and technology like, you know, VPN or multi-factor authentication that allow us to validate the user from home on a mobile device are really helpful to allow us to validate who you are, who you say you are, accessing corporate assets and applications. You know, and at the same time, making sure the teams feel connected, but in a secure fashion. And, you know, if those bad actors and hackers come, you know, to bear in our organization, how do we make sure that we defend against certain threats? And do you have a unified approach from a security architecture perspective that thinks about not just the laptop that your employee is using at home, whether you own it and manage it for them or it's their own device, their mobile phone, however your employees are accessing your corporate applications, your business critical information, we need to be thinking about, you know, a unified approach and a best-in-class approach. So we've been working with a number of our customers, especially in this area, to do just that. And so we've got a multitude of tools and technology that can really help to secure the entire experience across the workforce, from validating your identity, as I mentioned earlier, to allowing you to work from any device, anywhere. So I'm sure many of you are getting tired of the scenery at home. And so if you're fortunate enough to be able to go somewhere else for a period of time, or go to a cottage or somewhere else to work, you want to make sure that you've got the same level of security, whether you're sitting at home or somewhere else, or maybe you just want to go on your deck, right, and have some fresh air. And finally, securing those business critical applications, whether they're sitting in a cloud being accessed by your employees and your customers, or they're sitting somewhere in a data center on your premise. And it certainly needs to be simple, and it needs to be scalable. And I think, there's a lot out there to help, organizations protect themselves. And these are some of the key considerations that we're talking to customers about, and we're helping them solve for with our various tools and software technologies. So I just want to, Ulrike mentioned this at the beginning, and we have some really great resources available that we want to extend to this audience today. The first one, as mentioned, is a business recovery kit. So we have put together about $3,000 worth of Cisco technology to enable an organization to have individuals working from home. So this includes, our security portfolio, our networking, and our collaboration tools. And this is specifically designed for small, medium businesses and organizations. So we are thrilled to share this with you. We encourage you. We will share this site with you so you can go and learn more. And I hope somebody on this call wins one of these small business kits. And we'll, of course, give you the link. Ulrike mentioned we've been extending, in the face of the pandemic, many free trials of our technology, of our software technology, to our customers to help bridge the gap in face of the pandemic between needing a solution very quickly, and then taking the time to evaluate and make a decision on how you move forward. So we'll share access to where you can access those free trials on our website, on our Cisco website. So please feel free to visit there, and we'll share this URL after the presentation. And finally, I touched a bit on mental health as it pertains to our youth and our children, but I think everybody can relate, or is certainly feeling, a bit of a struggle in terms of their mental health at the moment. And so we've partnered with some fantastic organizations to bring the Life Recovery Program to you, and we'd like to share it with this audience as well. So the ability to participate in several webinars. There's a 3-month subscription we're offering up at no cost to you to access some of the amazing tools and services available to help with mental health. And with that, I will hand it back to Ulrike for Q&A.
All right. So thank you very much, Lisa and Wayne. That was not only incredibly insightful, it was an eye-opening presentation on many levels for new information reinforced, so important. And I want to congratulate you and thank you on, I took note of Connected North. That's a beautiful initiative to transforming lives through technology, and the wonderful numbers and accomplishments and going. So thank you really very much for this, and of course for this amazing presentation, which we will now go to the questions. If the QA portion can please be displayed so I can, or the panelists can have a look at them. I actually took note myself, if I may, and have a couple of questions which I took note during the presentation raised. You mentioned a few technologies being particularly important or consumed during the COVID time. Which would you describe, and then please why is like the #1 technology that companies have tapped into, in particular during that phase?
Sure, I can start with that. So I think,
Yeah.
and I just touched on it at the end there in terms of security, but being able to extend secure connectivity through VPN technology has certainly been a key focus area that we've seen, a lot of organizations had capabilities to allow some people to work from home, so a small percentage of the workforce. And what they've had to do in a very short period of time is go from 10 users to 100 users, or 10,000 to 20,000. So the scale has been a huge challenge, and I think whether they had a previous investment with Cisco or not, being able to scale quickly via software or via cloud security has been an absolute focus for a lot of our customers and a key area working with them. Wayne, I don't know if you want to touch on if there's anything else.
Yeah, I would probably add to that list collaboration. I think the fact that all of us are doing so many remote sessions, remote meetings, I mean, even webinars like this, enabled to be scaled up to one-on-one person meetings, or large format events. I think the collaboration technologies have been a cornerstone of this COVID pandemic. And I think even if we look at things like when CNN has their video calls and they're powered by WebEx, I think that's an interesting example around how ubiquitous collaboration has really become a part of this. I mean, I think we're all so ingrained now in having virtual meetings that I think it would be hard to imagine a world where this is not part of our everyday life in the future. So I think collaboration and collaboration technologies, especially video collaboration, would be one of the things I would say to that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I must admit, I can't see the questions. Can you see the questions that have come in?
Yeah, I just saw one pop up, and I'll read it aloud and sort of share some thoughts on it. So, with the workforce moving home, it's difficult to have people schedule vacation. There's nowhere to go. So with all the restrictions, and people are, obviously adapting to this new normal, do we have any suggestions outside sort of forcing a vacation schedule on a given group? And so actually, I can speak from experience within Cisco. So I could give you two examples. One, 100% agree. It's why would you want to take vacation now, I think, although people are, I think, starting to burn out, and so they're voluntarily taking it. But within Cisco, we've had two opportunities where our CEO has announced a day for me, and encouraged employees to take a Friday off. And they've been very intentional about the focus on mental health, and realizing that even though we're more productive, we are at home, and it's almost like you don't have an excuse to do anything else but work. So people are logging much longer hours. And so that was something culturally that's been received really well. They've done it twice now. And you're not really forcing it. You're kind of, giving people the opportunity to take the day. Another practice that we just heard of from another organization was, and this is less around vacation, more around kind of managing the day and managing, people's expectations internally, was having an hour or two in the day, kind of really encouraging people not to host internal meetings. And I thought that was really interesting to say, between 8 and 9 in the morning, or between 12 and 1, like, this is a no-fly zone. Like, let people have an hour, and whether people choose to eat a meal or visit with their kids or go for a walk or whatever it is, don't schedule an internal meeting to force people to take time, and sort of making that a company, priority. I thought that was really interesting, and a nice gesture to give people back, some time in the day, because I think we're all finding that, we're more productive, but we're back to back all day long. I think a lot of employees are feeling that. Great.
And I can actually now see the questions, and I've scribbled down something else here, which is of interest. You just provided a solution to an answer, Lisa, and I give it to you and Wayne. Could you speak perhaps and think about a few creative solutions that you've come across that came out of COVID-19? We always want to focus on opportunity and a positive outlook, so I'd be really curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that one. And it was something that I actually was invited to, and I thought it was a really fun way of doing something in this time. So it was a restaurant that realized that they're not getting out to, they can't have customers, but they initiated a virtual dinner, and it was basically a meal kit you'd purchase. They would deliver to your house, and you would go on to a video call and actually do a curated and organized meal prep. So it was like a cooking class online with a live chef who was actually giving the instruction, and it was a really novel way of kind of taking the restaurants that had food in their kitchen but couldn't serve customers, distributing that and allowing people to learn how to cook a pretty interesting meal on their own, but still have a virtual component of that where you can see the other people on the call and actually learn from a real chef live. I thought that was a really interesting and novel way of utilizing a lot of the challenges and coming up with something really interesting and fun. I don't know if Lisa,
yeah, no, I think I sort of have two on the top of my head. So I think one thing, and I don't know that I would label it creative, but maybe, I'd say it's a bit creative, but it really demonstrates sort of speed to market or time to market, is the time in which, many of our customers have said, we had a roadmap of digital transformation for 2 to 3 years, and we've accelerated that into sort of 6 months, right? And so the ability of many organizations to pivot, and as Wayne talked about in the beginning, sort of fail fast and take these risks to scale, has been mind-blowing to me, right? That organizations have been able to sort of move and shift that quickly. In terms of creativity, as a consumer, I've seen a lot of it. But I would say one that was really interesting to me, especially back in the spring, was one of the vineyards, because they couldn't host anyone to come in, and this was in the Okanagan, I believe, instead of, they couldn't host anyone to come in for tours and tastings and that type of thing, they actually sold packages of their wines to, previous clients and clientele, and did a virtual wine tasting. So it sort of, allowed for that experience. And I think, we talked a little bit about retail and establishing ensuring, you stay close to your customers in this new sort of digital and mobile and remote world. And I think organizations that are finding ways to be creative and use, the technology to their benefit are the ones that are going to be able to not only retain, but grow their customer base during this time, during this pandemic.
And actually just adding on to that, Lisa, I think it's a really interesting point, going back to, again, those 4 R's, that those those companies that were investing in those new routes to market or those new digital capabilities, and even when we look at how so many companies had to move their workforce home so quickly, they will have embedded a lot of confidence in their ability to move fast that they perhaps wouldn't have done before. Because I think if we asked a lot of those companies and customers now what their time frame of moving their workforce to be remote, what they would have probably said, 2 to 3 years, and that probably would have been aggressive. But this forced them to do it in 2 days, and I think that would have embedded a lot of confidence in their ability to execute these kinds of things very, very quickly. So really interesting.
Actually, a follow-up question that is indeed interesting. So it aligns with what you both just said. What would you describe as some of the best practices that you have observed? So maybe some advice to businesses and companies listening. Are there any general strategies that are common to your customers who are navigating the pandemic or have been navigating the pandemic successfully that you can give advice on?
I think, from my perspective, it's a lot of it's the whole notion around innovation. It's fail fast and move on. It's trying out new models, seeing if it works, not being too preoccupied in the failure that might have resulted in, because you'll get a lot of learning. And there may be components of that you can pivot to a new direction. And I think of all of the things that I've seen, that has been for me the most, I guess, insightful and also inspiring things. That when you see, companies trying things and it may not work, but they're moving it to a different direction, or they're learning from it. I think that for me, that's a lot of the spirit of innovation. So that would be the one thing I would call out as a major kind of thing to think about.
I think one of the best practices that I've seen is, organizations really focusing on the employee and the employee's experience at home, and giving them the tools that they need to be productive. So whether that's collaboration tools, whether that's secure connection back into those the critical network, or those business applications. I mean, those organizations that have really prioritized that, I think you hear from the employee base that they're, much more productive and much more satisfied, right? And that they feel that they're still having a good experience working for the organization despite not being in the office setting. So I'd say that's absolutely a best practice that we've seen, especially from a technology perspective, is those that have said, okay, we really need to empower our employees, and because we're going to be remote for extended period of time, we need to invest here, right? And just prioritizing that investment to make sure the employees have a good experience.
And that speaks to your point of also mental health and mental well-being, right? Taking care, whether it is through equipment, devices, advice, collaboration to security. It just makes you feel all over. It's a healthier environment that one creates for the employees. And I know we have 1 more minute as I'm watching the time. Well, I think that leaves me with a minute to thank you both, Lisa and Wayne, for having given the not only presentation, making yourself available for answering questions so knowledgeably and very authentically. It was a great pleasure. And thanks again to Cisco for being a CBRN partner and working with the Chamber. And for everyone who is a participant on this webinar, thank you very much for your time, for participating in the polls. I thought that was a fabulous idea, by the way, Lisa and Wayne, to have polls throughout the session and ask participants for their experience and their views as well. And again, to the audience at home, we will be following up with an email with a link with a recorded session. And should there be any questions that weren't captured, we do have them on file and we'll be able to answer them for you. So once again, thanks everyone, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at one of our next and upcoming webinars. So thank you again. Bye for now.
Thank you.